Really doing enough? Well, with me now is Marc Vlessing. He's Chief Executive of Pocket Living, which builds pre-packed starter homes in London. Marc, very good evening to you. What were the eye-catchers for you? Presumably you were quite happy with this extension of stamp duty relief to shared ownership.
I think that was a good news story for first-time buyers, but there was also a little bit in the Red Book afterwards in which they decided to extend the Help to Buy programme for first-time buyers until 2023, and that was exceptionally good news for that market segment.
You think the housing sector is ever going to wean itself off Help to Buy?
Oh yes, I'm sure it must. It's not a long-term solution to getting us out of the trouble that we're in. What was really interesting, I thought, about the budget was a recognition that the extra housing that the country desperately needs to come from the new verticals, as I call them. So more from the housing associations, more from SME builders, more from local authorities who've of course now been released to build on their own land. They've been allowed to borrow against their balance sheets. That's really big news.
Does that risk some councils borrowing over their heads or getting into financial difficulties if house prices then subsequently take a downturn?
I think the Treasury has been controlling the finances of the local authorities for such a long time, they're not going to let them do that in a hurry. But it will make a difference to have, in the 50s and the 60s, when we were for once building enough housing in this country, it was because the councils were also building. So we do need to get them back in the game.
Do you think local authorities have forgotten how to build big housing projects? I mean, clearly they've never stopped building council houses, but they haven't done it to any scale for decades now.
I think that's a really good point. It's going to take them a long time to build up the teams that they need. It's taken my company, Pocket Living, 10 years to build a really great team with which we're now building quite a lot of starter housing in London. So it's not going to happen overnight, and I think that the name of the game is going to have to be partnerships. They're going to have to want to work with those SME builders and developers that are coming out of the stocks as well.
Well, you've got quite a lot of work on the go here in London. I mean, how do you find local London authorities to deal with?
Increasingly receptive. I mean, there really has been an important shift in thinking around housing in this country, and particularly in London. The idea that we have only two forms of housing, open market housing, unbridled Victorian capitalism almost, and social housing doesn't fit with a modern housing market. So I think local authorities, policymakers, politicians are starting to understand that they need more variety in between those two extremes. And whatever you want to call that, whether it's intermediate housing, starter housing, key work housing, for some people that's rented housing, that's discounted. For other people it's shared ownership. In the case of Pocket, it's a discounted home that's sold only to people on particular incomes.
And also you target key workers quite a lot, don't you?
Yes, so about 50% of the housing that we build gets sold to people in the public sector or in the voluntary sector. But there are lots of people in the private sector, of course, who are on modest incomes, who need to be able to get themselves on the housing ladder as well.
Of course, one of the other things that Philip Hammond did yesterday, he said that part of this high street fund is going to enable empty shops to be converted into housing. Is that going to shift the dial much?
No, it's not going to shift the dial, but I think it's important that we try a little bit of everything, because there is no silver bullet for the scale of problem that we have. I mean, there's such a tremendous imbalance between supply and demand in this country. In other words, not enough supply versus the demand that we have. That you've got to try a little bit of everything. And I think, again, that's where government, and this is not just this government, I think successive governments over the last 10, 15 years have woken up to the fact that it's about lots of little initiatives across the board that hopefully will add up to, I would say, a 50% increase in housing from where we are today.
Any other very short measures that you'd have introduced?
I'd like to see them get more excited still about modular housing. I mean, it's very easy to get excited about the pictures and the cranes and housing going up very quickly, and they make for very good photo calls. I do think we need a planning break.
All right, Marc Vlessing from Pocket Living. Got to leave it there, I'm afraid. Thanks.